Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Alberta Health Services and the local RCMP were in attendance at the church, as they were, as the church tells me, on this past Good Friday. However, today and on Friday, officials did not try to enter the church or come onto church property. It's another capacity crowd here at GraceLife Church west of Edmonton for Easter Sunday services. Now, GraceLife Church has been the focal point in the fight for religious freedom in the face of the COVID lockdown restrictions on churches that limit places of worship to just 15% of fire code capacity, and also force congregants and parishioners into masks and to social distance from one another. The pastor here, Pastor James Coates, is recently off a 35-day stay in provincial custody for violating the public health orders on worship services. While Pastor Coates was gone, Pastor Jake Spence preached also to capacity crowds here at the church where no one wore masks or social distance, and it was wonderfully normal and perfectly healthy. Alberta Health Services and the local RCMP were in attendance at the church, as they were, as the church tells me, on this past Good Friday. However, today and on Friday, officials did not try to enter the church or come onto church property, and they left before noon, I suppose, having learned a lesson from last week when church elders made authorities follow the law and kept them out of the church. Take a look at what happened here at GraceLife last week.
Any amount of, if there's more than 93 vehicles in this parking lot, the vehicles don't drive themselves, so therefore it's reasonable to assume that there's 93 people minimum.
Again, we can't assume.
So at the end of the day, the Public Health Act says we have access to go in the building. Okay. If you don't want us to go in the building, that's fine, but you're accepting the fact you're denying us access to the building. Okay? So if you deny access to the building, there's potential for criminal charges or potential for additional charges.
Yeah.
So that being said, we're going to respect the fact that you guys don't want us to go to the church. We're not going to go into the church. Okay. We're going to stay outside and we'll observe the numbers as they come.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? So then there's no further interaction.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Are you satisfied with that?
Very much so, yeah. If you can observe from outside.
Now, in Canada, interrupting or disrupting a church service breaks Section 176(2) of the Criminal Code of Canada, and the elders at GraceLife put on a bit of a clinic last Sunday for how other churches should deal with the police. Firm, polite, but righteous and Christian. Now, the media showed up today with at least 4 security guards for just a handful of journalists. It was a weird show of force given that this church is so committed to peaceful resistance to a bad law that their pastor turned himself in to authorities February 16th to serve the aforementioned 35 days in jail. They're clearly not violent here. Today's Sunday sermon was preached by Pastor Mike Hovland from Grace Bible Fellowship in Crete, Alberta. Now, that's the sister church to GraceLife, and it's in northern Alberta. Now, that church, too, has been fully open without adhering to Alberta government restrictions on churches. However, today, Pastor James was in attendance with his family. Now, there were some, I would describe as Westboro Baptist-type protesters who came to protest this church on Easter Sunday from across the road where all the mainstream media journalists are kept off of church property. These Westboro Baptist types held signs that read, "Spread kindness, not COVID," and "What would Jesus do?" Hang out in a cohort of 12. I mean, who wants to tell them that that also means that 12 apostles and Jesus would have all received a lockdown ticket from the Romans for breaking the Alberta current public health rules for gathering in a group larger than 10? I mean, I think that's still $3,600 to have the Last Supper. And asking what Jesus would do at a church trying to do exactly what Jesus would do is a bit of a bad idea if you really don't want an answer to that question, because when someone from the church crossed the street to try to tell these protesters what Jesus would indeed do, well, those Westboro Baptist types ran away, and from what I understand, they did burst into tears. Frankly, I pity them because I wish they had people in their lives who cared enough about them to tell them that protesting Christians on the most important day in Christianity is a bit of a terrible look. GraceLife here remains one of the most important places in all of Alberta, maybe even Canada, and they're making a stand. They're risking a fine to stand up for this bizarre dictatorship we're all living under. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. If you'd like to help Rebel News help the hundreds of people whose legal fees we are paying to fight COVID lockdown tickets in court, please donate today at fightthefines.com.